The Gonzalez family seemed picture-perfect. Kenneth Gonzalez, a successful architect, and his wife, Lindsay, a beloved kindergarten teacher, lived in a beautiful urban home with their 4-year-old daughter, Haley. Kenneth had always been a devoted husband and father, working hard to provide for his family while making sure to spend quality time with them. Their wedding anniversary was approaching, and Kenneth had planned a grand celebration to mark the milestone. Life was busy but fulfilling. Kenneth often found himself working late to meet project deadlines, but he always made time for Lindsay and Haley. Lindsay, too, was committed to her family, or so Kenneth believed. She had started working part-time to spend more time with Haley, and Kenneth admired her dedication. Kenneth and Lindsay had a close-knit group of friends who often gathered for barbecues and holiday parties. Their neighbors, the Martins and the Andersons, had children around Haley's age, making playdates a regular event. Lindsay often organized these gatherings, becoming the heart of their social circle. Kenneth's best friend, Jose, a fellow architect, and his wife, Monica, were frequent visitors. They had been friends since college and shared many memories, both joyful and challenging. Despite the bustling social life, Lindsay seemed increasingly preoccupied. Kenneth noticed her frequent texting and occasional late nights out with friends, but he trusted her implicitly. He often told himself that he was just being paranoid, a symptom of his own stressful work life. Lindsay's transformation was subtle at first. She would spend hours on her phone, smiling at messages that Kenneth assumed were from her friends. When he asked, she would dismiss his concerns with a wave, saying, "Just catching up with an old friend?" Kenneth would nod, feeling a twinge of unease but brushing it off. Unknown to Kenneth, Lindsay had reconnected with Chris, an old college friend who had recently moved back to town. Chris was charming, witty, and had a way of making Lindsay feel young and carefree again. Their coffee catch-ups soon became a regular occurrence, and before long, they were sharing intimate details of their lives. Lindsay felt a rush of excitement she hadn't experienced in years, a stark contrast to the routine of her married life. Chris had his own motives for rekindling the friendship. He had always harbored feelings for Lindsay, even when they were younger. Seeing her again stirred old desires, and he was determined to win her over. Chris began to weave himself into Lindsay's life, offering a sympathetic ear and a shoulder to lean on. He often spoke of his own unhappy marriage, creating a sense of camaraderie and mutual dissatisfaction. Lindsay, feeling neglected by Kenneth, found herself drawn to Chris's attention. Their conversations grew more intimate, their meetings more frequent. They would meet at secluded cafes, hidden from prying eyes, where they would talk for hours. Chris would compliment her, making her feel valued and desired. Lindsay, caught in the throes of infatuation, ignored the growing guilt gnawing at her. Kenneth's work at the architectural firm was demanding, with long hours and high expectations. He was working on a prestigious project, a state-of-the-art community center that would be the crown jewel of his career. The pressure to meet deadlines meant he often came home late, exhausted and preoccupied. He would find Lindsay already in bed, her back turned to him, and he would kiss her goodnight, unaware of the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Haley, perceptive and innocent, sensed the tension between her parents. She would often crawl into bed with them, seeking comfort in their presence. Kenneth cherished these moments, feeling a deep sense of love for his family. He would read Haley bedtime stories, his soothing voice a balm for his own weary soul. Lindsay would watch them with a wistful smile, her heart torn between the life she had and the life she was beginning to desire. Lindsay, on the other hand, felt a growing sense of dread. The affair with Chris had intensified, and the guilt was becoming unbearable. She would stare at the anniversary invitation on their fridge, a stark reminder of her betrayal. Chris, sensing her distress, would reassure her, telling her that they were meant to be together, that their love was worth the risk. Kenneth noticed a change in Lindsay. She was distant, her smiles forced, her laughter hollow. He attributed it to the stress of planning the event and tried to lighten her load, taking on more responsibilities at home. He would surprise her with flowers, cook her favorite meals, and leave little notes of affection around the house. One evening, Kenneth returned home earlier than usual, eager to surprise Lindsay and Haley with a spontaneous dinner outing. His day had been particularly successful. He had received news that his architectural design for the community center had been approved. Wanting to celebrate this professional milestone with his family, he stopped by a florist to pick up a bouquet of Lindsay's favorite lilies and a small toy for Haley. As Kenneth entered the house, he was greeted by an eerie silence. The usual bustle and laughter were absent. He called out, "Lindsay? Haley? I'm home," but received no response. A sense of unease settled in his stomach as he set down his briefcase and gifts. The faint sound of Haley's muffled cries drifted from upstairs, sending a chill down his spine. Kenneth's heart raced as he hurried up the stairs. The sound of Haley's cries grew clearer, interspersed with the indistinct murmurs of a man's voice. He could make out words now, and the threatening tone sent adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Never tell this to your dad or I will." Panic surged through Kenneth, fueling his steps as he reached the bedroom door. He paused for a split second, taking a deep breath before bursting into the room. The sight that greeted Kenneth was worse than anything he could have imagined. Haley, her eyes red and puffy from crying, ran towards him, her small frame trembling. "Daddy!" she sobbed, throwing herself into his arms. "Daddy, I saw Mom in this bed with Uncle Chris, with no clothes on. They warned me not to tell you." Kenneth's world shattered in that moment. He looked up to see Lindsay and Chris scrambling to cover themselves, shock and guilt etched on their faces. The room, which had once been a sanctuary of love and trust, was now a scene of betrayal. Kenneth slapped Lindsay's face harder. Rage like he had never known consumed Kenneth. He gently pushed Haley behind him, shielding her from the scene. His voice was a dangerous calm as he spoke. "Get out, both of you." Chris, visibly shaken, grabbed his things and fled without a word. He nearly tripped over his shoes in his haste to leave, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. Kenneth's icy stare followed him until he was out the door. The silence in the room grew thicker, the tension palpable. Lindsay, tears streaming down her face, tried to approach Kenneth, but he took a step back, his eyes filled with fury and disbelief. "Kenneth, please, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice trembling. Kenneth clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out. "Explain? How do you explain betraying our family, Lindsay? How do you explain doing this in our home, in front of our daughter?" The intensity of the moment was broken by the arrival of their neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, who had heard the commotion. Seeing Kenneth's distressed state and Haley's tear-streaked face, she quickly understood that something terrible had happened. "Kenneth, is everything all right?" she asked cautiously. "Can you please take Haley to your house for a bit?" Kenneth managed to say, his voice strained. "I need to handle this." Mrs. Anderson nodded, gently coaxing Haley to come with her. "Come on, sweetie. Let's go play with Emma," she said softly. Haley looked up at Kenneth, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. He knelt down and kissed her forehead. "It's going to be okay, Haley. Daddy just needs to talk to Mommy and Uncle Chris." Kenneth knew he needed to stay calm for Haley's sake. He hugged his daughter tightly, reassuring her that everything would be all right. Haley nodded, still sniffling, and left, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny. With Haley safely away, Kenneth turned back to Lindsay, who was now fully dressed and standing by the bed, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Why, Lindsay? Why did you do this?" Lindsay's shoulders slumped as she struggled to find the words. "I don't know, Kenneth. I felt lonely, neglected. Chris was there for me when you were always at work. It just happened. And of cause he is better than you in bed." Kenneth shook his head, his anger giving way to a profound sadness. "You could have talked to me, Lindsay. We could have worked through it. But this is unforgivable." Lindsay broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Kenneth took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "You've got 5 minutes to get out of my house," Kenneth said, his voice a dangerous calm. "Both of you." Lindsay, now fully dressed, stood by the bed, her hands trembling. "Kenneth, please, let me explain," she began, her voice wavering. Kenneth raised a hand to silence her. "Save it, Lindsay. I don't want to hear your excuses. We'll discuss this later." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Lindsay's shoulders slumped in defeat as she gathered her belongings. After Lindsay left, Kenneth sat in the now empty bedroom, the weight of the betrayal settling over him. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that he needed to stay strong for Haley. The image of her tear-streaked face fueled his resolve. He would protect her, and he would find a way to rebuild their lives, no matter what it took. Mrs. Anderson, their neighbor, appeared at the doorway with Haley. She had heard the commotion and had come to check on them. "Kenneth, is everything all right?" she asked cautiously, her eyes darting between him and the retreating figure of Lindsay. Kenneth forced a smile for Haley's sake. "Yes, Mrs. Anderson. Thank you for looking after Haley. Can she stay with you for a little while longer?" Mrs. Anderson nodded, her face full of concern. "Of course, Kenneth. Come on, Haley, let's go play with Emma some more." Haley clung to Kenneth for a moment, her small hands gripping his shirt. "Daddy, will you be okay?" Kenneth knelt down, kissing her forehead. "I'll be fine, sweetie. I love you." "I love you too, Daddy," Haley whispered before following Mrs. Anderson back to her house. With Haley safely away, Kenneth sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the enormity of the situation crashing down on him. He needed to talk to someone, to process what had just happened. He picked up his phone and called his best friend, Jose. Jose answered on the second ring. "Hey, Kenneth, what's up?" "Jose, I need you to come over." "Now," Kenneth said, his voice strained. "I'll be there in 10, Jose replied, sensing the urgency in Kenneth's tone. True to his word, Jose arrived within minutes. He found Kenneth sitting on the living room couch, staring blankly at the wall. "Kenneth, what happened?" Kenneth recounted the events, his voice raw with emotion. Jose listened intently, his expression shifting from shock to anger to sympathy. "That bastard," Jose muttered when Kenneth finished. "And Lindsay. I can't believe she'd do this." "I know," Kenneth said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to figure out what to do next." Jose put a reassuring hand on Kenneth's shoulder. "First, you need to take care of Haley. She's your priority. And we need to get some legal advice. Do you have a good lawyer?" "I do," Kenneth replied, thinking of his old college friend, Monica, who had gone into family law. "I'll call Monica tomorrow." "Good," Jose said. "In the meantime, you need to get some rest. You've had a hell of a day." Kenneth nodded, exhaustion hitting him all at once. "Thanks, Jose. I don't know what I'd do without you." "That's what friends are for," Jose said, giving Kenneth a brief hug. "I'll crash on the couch tonight, just in case you need anything." That night, Kenneth lay in bed, sleep eluding him. His mind replayed the day's events over and over. He couldn't shake the image of Haley's tear-streaked face or the sound of Lindsay's pleading voice. He felt a mix of rage, betrayal, and profound sadness. How had everything gone so wrong? The next morning, Kenneth called Monica. She agreed to meet him at her office later that day. He then spent some time with Haley, trying to keep things as normal as possible for her. They played in the backyard, and Kenneth marveled at her resilience. "Daddy, will Mommy come back?" Haley asked suddenly, her big eyes filled with innocent curiosity. Kenneth swallowed hard. "I don't know, sweetie. Mommy and Daddy need to talk about some things. But I promise you, everything will be okay." Haley nodded, accepting his words with the trust only a child could have. Kenneth hugged her tightly, vowing to protect her no matter what. Kenneth knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to stay strong for Haley. With Jose and Monica's support, he felt a glimmer of hope. They would navigate the storm together, and one day, the calm would return. Kenneth spent the day meticulously planning his revenge. His first step was to gather evidence of the affair. He searched through Lindsay's phone and computer, finding a trove of incriminating messages and photos. He printed out the most damning ones, careful to document everything in a way that would be irrefutable. In the evening, he went to Monica's office, his lawyer friend. She was appalled by the situation and offered her full support. "Kenneth, you need to think about what's best for Haley. We can use this evidence in the divorce proceedings to ensure you get full custody." Kenneth nodded, his resolve hardening. "I want to make sure Lindsay and Chris pay for what they've done. Can you help me with that?" Monica smiled grimly. "Absolutely. Let's get to work." While Monica handled the legal aspects, Kenneth focused on Chris. He knew that to truly ruin him, he needed to find skeletons in his closet. He hired a private investigator, a grizzled former cop named Jake, to dig into Chris's background. Within days, Jake had uncovered a series of unsavory details about Chris, including financial troubles, a previous affair that ended disastrously, and even a pending lawsuit from a former business partner. Kenneth spent hours poring over the reports, formulating a plan that would exploit every weakness. He knew that Chris's career was built on a carefully crafted image, and if that image were to shatter, his life would crumble with it. He devised a multifaceted plan that would ruin Chris's reputation and career while ensuring Lindsay would lose everything she held dear. Kenneth's first move was to expose the affair publicly. He compiled the evidence into a dossier and anonymously sent it to Chris's workplace and Lindsay's school. He knew that once the affair was out in the open, the fallout would be immediate and devastating. Chris's colleagues would lose respect for him, and Lindsay's position as a beloved kindergarten teacher would be jeopardized. The night before he acted, he meticulously prepared the incriminating evidence, photographs, screenshots of text messages, and call logs. He knew this would be the most painful and decisive step, but it was necessary to dismantle the facade Lindsay and Chris had built. Kenneth sent the dossier to the principal of the school where Lindsay worked, knowing it would cause a scandal. The next morning, as Lindsay arrived at school, whispers and side glances greeted her. She sensed something was wrong but continued to her classroom. Within an hour, the principal summoned her. In his office, she was confronted with the evidence. Her face turned pale, and tears welled up as she realized the extent of her actions' consequences. The principal, visibly disappointed, informed her that she was placed on immediate administrative leave pending further investigation. The news spread quickly among the staff and parents, causing a ripple of shock and disgust. Simultaneously, Kenneth sent a similar package to Chris's employer. Chris, an executive at a reputable firm, was in a meeting when his assistant handed him the envelope. His hands shook as he read the contents, and he excused himself, feeling the weight of his world collapsing. The HR department called him in shortly after, suspending him and launching an internal review. The gossip mill at work churned relentlessly, and Chris found himself ostracized by colleagues who once respected him. To ensure Chris faced consequences in his personal life, Kenneth mailed the evidence to Chris's parents and siblings. Chris's family, who had always admired him, were devastated. His mother, heartbroken, called him in tears, unable to comprehend how he could betray his friend and his own family. Chris's father, stern and unforgiving, cut off all financial support, leaving Chris to fend for himself. This familial rejection added another layer of misery to Chris's already crumbling life. With the affair exposed, Kenneth initiated divorce proceedings. He met with Monica, his lawyer, and provided her with all the evidence. She filed the papers, citing infidelity and emotional distress. The case moved quickly, given the overwhelming evidence. In court, Kenneth presented his argument, emphasizing how Lindsay's actions had endangered Haley's well-being. He spoke about the emotional trauma inflicted on their daughter and the threat posed by Lindsay and Chris's reckless behavior. The judge, moved by Kenneth's testimony and the incontrovertible evidence, granted him full custody of Haley. Lindsay was given limited visitation rights under supervision. The court also awarded Kenneth the house and a significant portion of their assets, leaving Lindsay with little more than the clothes on her back. She was ordered to vacate the family home within a week. Satisfied with the legal victory, Kenneth turned his attention to ensuring Chris's complete downfall. He used the information Jake, the private investigator, had uncovered about Chris's financial troubles and dubious past. Kenneth anonymously tipped off the IRS about Chris's financial discrepancies, prompting an audit. He also reached out to Chris's creditors, suggesting that Chris was planning to flee. This led to relentless pressure from collection agencies and legal threats, pushing Chris to the brink of financial ruin. Kenneth didn't stop there. He created anonymous social media accounts to share the story of Chris's affair and betrayal, joining local community groups and forums to spread the word. The story quickly went viral, drawing condemnation and disgust from all quarters. Chris's reputation was irreparably damaged, and he found himself isolated and reviled. Amidst the chaos, Kenneth found support from unexpected quarters. Mrs. Anderson, their neighbor, became a pillar of strength. She frequently checked on Kenneth and Haley, offering help and comfort. Her teenage daughter, Emma, began babysitting Haley, forming a bond that brought some normalcy back into Haley's life. Jose, Kenneth's best friend, stood by him throughout, providing emotional support and practical advice. He introduced Kenneth to a support group for single fathers, where Kenneth met other men who had faced similar betrayals. This group became a source of solace and camaraderie, helping Kenneth rebuild his confidence and sense of self. Lindsay, now jobless and ostracized, struggled to rebuild her life. She moved in with her sister, who was sympathetic but firm in her disapproval. Lindsay had to face the consequences of her actions every day as she grappled with guilt and regret. Chris, on the other hand, spiraled further. Unable to secure another job due to his tarnished reputation, he turned to alcohol, becoming a shadow of his former self. His relationship with Lindsay disintegrated under the weight of their collective shame and the relentless pressure from all sides. With the execution of his plan complete, Kenneth focused on healing and moving forward. He enrolled Haley in a new school, wanting to give her a fresh start away from the scandal. He dedicated himself to being the best father he could be, spending quality time with her and ensuring she felt loved and secure. Kenneth also took steps to rebuild his own life. He reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies he had neglected, and even started dating again, though cautiously. He wanted to ensure that anyone who came into his life would be good for Haley as well. As the months passed, the pain of betrayal began to fade, replaced by a sense of resilience and newfound strength. Kenneth had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever the future held with hope and determination. With their lives in ruins, Lindsay and Chris had no choice but to come crawling back to Kenneth, begging for mercy. On a rainy afternoon, they showed up at his doorstep, looking desperate and defeated. Lindsay's eyes were red from crying, and Chris appeared gaunt and disheveled. Kenneth opened the door, his face a mask of steely resolve. Lindsay immediately fell to her knees, sobbing. "Kenneth, please," she begged. "I've lost everything. Can we talk?" Kenneth looked down at her, his expression icy. "You brought this on yourself, Lindsay. You betrayed our family and threatened our daughter. You deserve everything that's happened to you." Chris, standing behind Lindsay, tried to intervene. "Kenneth, we're sorry. We never meant for things to get this bad." Kenneth silenced him with a glare. "You don't get to say anything. You're lucky I didn't involve the police." Kenneth's calm demeanor only added to their despair. "Why are you here?" he asked, crossing his arms. Lindsay wiped her tears, struggling to speak. "I know I've done horrible things, but I want to make amends. I want to be part of Haley's life again." Kenneth's expression softened for a moment as he thought about Haley. He knew how much she missed her mother, despite everything. "Making amends won't be easy," he said, "and it won't erase what you've done. But if you're serious, you'll do exactly as I say." Lindsay nodded fervently. "Anything, Kenneth. I'll do anything." Kenneth's final act of revenge was to have them both publicly apologize to Haley. He recorded their tearful apologies in his living room, making sure the video captured their remorse and shame. Lindsay and Chris sat on the couch, their faces pale and drawn. Lindsay took a deep breath, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Haley, my sweet girl, I'm so sorry for everything I've done. I was selfish and made terrible mistakes. I love you more than anything, and I hope one day you can forgive me." Chris followed, his voice trembling. "Haley, I'm sorry for hurting you and your family. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you can find it in your heart to move past this." Kenneth watched silently, his heart heavy with a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Once the video was complete, he posted it online, ensuring that their humiliation would be complete. The video quickly went viral, drawing comments from people all over who condemned Lindsay and Chris's actions while expressing support for Kenneth and Haley. Lindsay's life continued to spiral downward. She struggled to find work, as her reputation had been shattered. She moved in with her sister, who was sympathetic but firm in her disapproval. Lindsay spent her days looking for jobs and her nights crying herself to sleep, haunted by her mistakes and the pain she had caused. She also faced the challenge of rebuilding her relationship with Haley. She knew it would be a long and difficult road, filled with supervised visits and the constant reminder of her betrayal. but she was determined to earn back her daughter's trust, no matter how long it took. Chris fared no better. Unable to secure employment due to his tarnished reputation, he found solace in alcohol, becoming a shadow of his former self. His family had disowned him, and his friends abandoned him, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. The once confident and successful man was now a broken and isolated figure. For Kenneth, the satisfaction came not from their suffering but from knowing that Haley was safe and that justice had been served. He continued to focus on providing a stable and loving environment for her. They spent weekends at the park, and he made sure to be there for every school event and bedtime story. Throughout this ordeal, Jose remained a steadfast friend. He introduced Kenneth to a support group for single fathers, where Kenneth met other men who had faced similar betrayals. This group became a source of solace and camaraderie, helping Kenneth rebuild his confidence and sense of self. As the months passed, the pain of betrayal began to fade, replaced by a sense of resilience and newfound strength. Kenneth had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever the future held with hope and determination. He knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but with Haley by his side and the support of friends like Jose, he felt prepared for whatever came next. With the nightmare behind them, Kenneth focused on rebuilding his life with Haley. He dedicated himself to being the best father he could be, making sure Haley felt loved and secure. The scars of betrayal ran deep, but Kenneth was determined to heal them and create a better future for both of them. Kenneth knew that to truly move forward, they needed professional help. He found a reputable therapist, Dr. Monica Mitchell, who specialized in trauma and family therapy. Their first session was nerve-wracking, but Kenneth was determined to face it head-on. He explained the situation to Dr. Mitchell, who listened attentively and assured them that healing was possible. In their sessions, Kenneth and Haley learned to communicate their feelings more openly. Haley, who had been quiet and withdrawn since the incident, began to open up about her fears and confusion. She expressed her anger and sadness, and Dr. Mitchell helped her process these emotions in a healthy way. Kenneth, too, found solace in these sessions. He learned to cope with his own feelings of betrayal and anger, and to focus on the positive aspects of his life. Therapy became a safe space where they could express their pain and work towards healing together. Jose continued to be a pillar of support for Kenneth. They spent countless hours talking, hiking, and even working on projects around the house. Jose's unwavering friendship was a source of strength for Kenneth, reminding him that he wasn't alone in his journey. Mrs. Anderson and her daughter, Emma, also played crucial roles. Emma's babysitting duties extended beyond mere childcare. She became a big sister figure to Haley, offering comfort and companionship. Mrs. Anderson often invited Kenneth and Haley over for dinner, creating a sense of community and normalcy that had been missing from their lives. Kenneth immersed himself in his work, finding solace in the routine and creative challenges of architecture. He took on new projects, pouring his energy into designs that reflected his renewed sense of purpose. His colleagues noticed a change in him, a quiet determination and a subtle resilience that had replaced the uncertainty and pain. Outside of work, Kenneth rekindled old hobbies. He joined a woodworking club, where he spent weekends crafting furniture and decorative pieces. The act of creating something tangible with his hands was therapeutic, providing a sense of accomplishment and peace. Kenneth reached out to old friends he had lost touch with over the years. He organized casual get-togethers, inviting them over for barbecues and game nights. Reconnecting with these friends reminded him of the importance of social bonds and the joy of shared experiences. One evening, Kenneth invited a group of friends over for a poker night. The atmosphere was lighthearted, filled with laughter and friendly banter. It was a stark contrast to the somber and tense mood that had dominated his life for so long. As he looked around the table at the familiar faces, he felt a renewed sense of belonging and contentment. As months turned into a year, Kenneth began to consider the possibility of dating again. He was cautious, not wanting to rush into anything that might disrupt the stability he had worked so hard to create for Haley. He joined an online dating site, carefully screening potential matches and taking things slowly. One evening, he met Rachel, a warm and compassionate woman who worked as a nurse. Their first date was a simple dinner at a local restaurant, but the conversation flowed effortlessly. Rachel's understanding and empathy resonated with Kenneth, and they began to see each other regularly. Haley continued to thrive under Kenneth's care. She made new friends at her school and participated in extracurricular activities like ballet and soccer. Kenneth attended every recital and game, cheering her on and celebrating her achievements. Haley's laughter and smiles became more frequent, a testament to the healing power of love and support. Occasionally, the past would resurface, bringing with it moments of pain and anger. Kenneth knew that healing was not a linear process, and there would be setbacks along the way. He remained committed to therapy, continuing to work through his emotions and ensuring that Haley felt safe and supported. One evening, as they were reading a bedtime story, Haley looked up at Kenneth and said, "Daddy, I'm glad we're together. I love you." Kenneth's heart swelled with emotion. "I love you too, sweetheart. We're going to be okay." Gradually, Kenneth and Haley and Rachel built a new life filled with love, laughter, and hope. They got married and celebrated milestones together, creating new traditions and memories. Kenneth knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but he felt prepared to face them with Haley by his side. As he watched Haley grow and thrive, Kenneth realized that he had done more than just rebuild their lives. He had created a foundation of resilience and love that would carry them forward, no matter what the future held.